Hey guys, welcome to your first screencast of the year. So we're going to do a mix of book readings, of primary source readings for homework. I want to start the year off with one of these as kind of a good practice so we could get started with a good mix of kind of what you're used to with lecture, but in a way that you might not be quite used to with that being done online. So my expectations for what you're doing while you're watching this is that you're not just passively watching, that you are taking notes. You have the opportunity with these to rewind. If I just lectured you in class, you could not do that. I recommend you going back, rewinding, rewatching a portion you didn't totally understand. Take notes on all of it. Make sure that you get to a depth of understanding, especially over our key concepts. So with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and let you start taking notes, and I'll start going over our key concepts. I'm not always going to grade the notes. Most of the time I probably won't, but there will be times when I come in, check your binders, make sure that you've been taking notes on these. So please take notes. I'll leave it up to you how you do that. If you want to type them, that's fine. If you want to write them out, that's fine with me as well, but they need to make their way into your binder eventually. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so your key concepts are going to be what you are working on trying to learn throughout this screencast, throughout these lectures. I'll give you these key concepts for each unit. You have them on the Period 1 outline found on Rockspace. But here's what we're going to be going over today. For Period 1, we're going to think very broad in those full key concepts. We're not going to get into sub-concepts. But the two key concepts you need to know are 1.1, which in summary is basically how did Native Americans and pre-Columbian societies adapt to their environments, and 1.2 is that the contact between Europeans and the natives had massive changes in a couple different ways, whether that be political, social, and cultural. So you need to know, one, geography's effect on the pre-Columbian native societies, and two, what the impact is of Columbus, of the Columbian Exchange, and European native interactions. So how do we get here in the first place? So in populating the Americas, we've always heard the land bridge theory, and typically that's kind of what historians fall back on in population of the Americas. The land bridge existed 25,000 years after the Ice Age, 35,000 to 10,000 years ago. And so our assumption is that initially the Europeans or Russians, the Asians, at that point in time would have been the continent they were a part of, migrated across this land bridge and made their way into the Americas at some point, and clearly populated throughout all of the Americas, North America, Central, through tips of Southern America. So this one land bridge made it possible for the initial members of Europe and Asia to work their way into this area and become the population. But of course, as the ocean swelled, the land bridge and the glacier bridge got shut down, and those people were then the only population of North America. Initially, they're really mainly nomads for the most part. They live off the land, hunting, fishing, gathering. And the consequences of this is that there's not a whole lot of population growth. There's not a whole lot of specialization. If you don't have large-scale agriculture, there's no real chance for you to develop. There's no real chance for you to really develop specialized cultures, systems of government, or really complex religions, because everyone is working on sustenance farming, hunting and gathering, and survival. Working on the hierarchy of needs. If you've studied psychology, that the first thing that they go after is the ability to survive, more so than just than culture or society. So for the most part, that's what they're focused on, and that doesn't really allow them to develop more complex societies. But initially, that nomadic lifestyle is eventually going to change in parts of the Americas because of the introduction of maize or corn. Native Americans learned to grow crops for the first time, maize, pumpkin, squash, beans, and these are really the only things that they're growing in the Americas for the most part. And populations begin to boom because of this, especially in Central America and Southern America. And North America, and what is now USA, really societies hadn't grown massively complex. The Iroquois had some others, I guess some of the Seminoles, some throughout the southeast and the northeast had developed larger societies, but nothing in comparison to the Aztecs, the Mayas, the Incas, those that understood how they could grow large-scale agriculture, maize, corn, pumpkins, and squash, and beans. The effects of that is that populations begin to boom. Populations begin to boom because of that increasing food supply, that specialization. This is a key word that you really need to know. Because of that specialization, those begin to develop formal government writing systems, religions begin to form, and so civilizations really start to expand. We have many of those Americans, these large icons, such as like the Mayans, the Mayan pyramids. The Mayans were mathematicians, astronomers. Many of their buildings are put together so perfectly that modern architects and scientists believe that even with the use of modern technology, we would not be able to replicate some of the Mayan architecture. The Aztecs were more of a war society. They were war-based. Over 5 million people, in the Aztec nation. Brilliant military tacticians, won through massive force, but a very brutal culture. And the Incas, we have Machu Picchu in Peru. They put together one of the largest system of roads and agriculture on hillsides and mountain terrains through Peru and parts of South America. So these cultures aren't completely primitive. They've developed a system of roads that the Incas that would rival the system that Rome put together. The Aztecs put together one of the most dominant military forces in history, and the Mayans were some of the most brilliant mathematicians that we never really truly got to study, as they never completely wrote this all out and left it for us. Many of those cultures were entirely destroyed when Columbus made his way over. So let's look specifically at how some areas of the Americas are affected, specifically in the United States. For instance, the Southwest of the United States, we have the Apache, Navajo, Anasazi, Hopi, and Yuam. And their environment is going to be harsh, inhospitable. It's difficult. It's not easy living in there. It's desert-like. And as a response to this, these different people, the Apache, the Navajo, their response is that they begin to build cities in the sides of cliffs. They grow corn, develop irrigation systems, and they continue a much more nomadic lifestyle. You're not going to be able to grow large-scale agriculture in the Southwest Americas. In Arizona and New Mexico, those areas just aren't fit for it. And so they developed societies, they developed areas, these houses built into cliffs, where they would grow small agriculture sustenance, and often they revolved around trading and becoming nomads. In the Northwest, around the Oregon, Washington, Northern California areas, it's more cool, rainy forests and rivers. And so the response is that they become hunters, fishers. They build massive canoes with the trees, the redwoods. And they are able to fish on the rivers, the streams in that area, as well all the way into the other parts of the Pacific Ocean. Most of them have no written sources of language, so we don't have a whole lot of history on them, except that what we can decipher from their totem poles that are left behind. But they use their resources of salmon and cedar to become very wealthy societies. They traded well throughout their areas. And examples of that are the Chinook and the Cowlitz. All right, over in the Great Plains, we have grassy plains with very little tree growth, not a whole lot of rain, but plenty of rain, enough just to kind of set up some grasslands, but not really the best area to grow agriculture either. So they are nomadic, they are trade oriented, they travel. They really follow the buffalo more than anything, and they use the buffalo for so much more than just their meat. They used the entire buffalo. They used buffalo bones for cups. They used their hair to put together to make whips. Containers to catch the small amount of rainfall that falls. They used every piece of the buffalo in these Great Plains, because the buffalo, though it's not something that we think of being massively populated today, there were millions upon millions, over 15 million buffalo initially in the 14th and 15th centuries, whenever Europeans made contact. In the Northeast, we have variations of climate. You all know that, ranging from New York through Boston. It changes from can be very, very hot summers up in the areas around Virginia and Washington, D.C. areas, up through New York, Maine, which are consistently cold but have warmer summers. So very, very wide variations of Indian cultures because of this. There's no one set culture, but they do have some large developments. The Iroquois develop a confederacy of states, including a governing document, wigwams and longhouses with a typical shelter. These developed larger communities. And they did that through series of trades, and they did it through, and some of them, the Iroquois developed one of the first systems of democracies used at this point in time. So these are a little bit more, I guess, intellectual based. And they did that through developing agriculture and a little bit more complex societies and adapting well to their environment. In the southeast, we have hot, humid, but varied, good soil and climate for growing, but never really gets taken advantage of because many of the crops that they have simply aren't used effectively, and they don't have them for too long. So in these areas, they have a mix of hunters, gatherers. They often remain in the same general area, but were sometimes forced to move to locations where food was the most abundant. One thing that you will need to know is that this Three Sisters farming is developed to base off of the environment. They grew corn, squash, and beans simultaneously, often in the same area, as a way to consistently recycle and replenish the soil. So they understood that if they only grew corn consistently, they would seep and remove all of the nutrients from the soil. So they developed this Three Sisters farming to do that. So at this point, what we're going to do is I'm going to stop. Don't want to make get these to 20 or 25 minutes long. What I would like you to do is you can go ahead and stop at this point. Write out, if you would, write me a summary of key concept 1.1. We're going to move on and do key concept 1.2 in the next video. So thank you for watching screencast number 1. This hopefully gives you a very good understanding of this first key concept. As native populations migrated and settled across the vast expanses of North America, they developed distinct and increasingly complex societies by adapting to and transforming their diverse environments. We'll do another short video on key concept 1.2, and then you'll be done for the day. Thanks, guys.